I'm not leaving you, I'm on a creative journey, she declared after her painting mentor stayed late with her at the studio. I said nothing, emptied my closet, and drove off. A few weeks on, her artistic journey ended in a very worldly panic. I never thought Rebecca would be the type to throw away 2 years for someone she'd known 6 weeks, but I guess I underestimated the power of a middle-aged art teacher with a European accent and strong opinions about authentic expression. We'd been living together in our Portland apartment for nearly 2 years, me covering most of the $2,400 monthly rent since my graphic design work paid substantially better than her part-time barista shifts at that trendy coffee place downtown where she mostly complained about entitled customers and inconsistent scheduling. Our relationship had settled into a comfortable routine. I handled the bigger bills, she contributed what she could, and we split groceries and utilities fairly. I thought we were building something solid together, something that could grow into marriage and maybe kids down the line. Everything changed the moment Rebecca enrolled in Vincent's advanced oil painting class at the Community Arts Center. I should have recognized the warning signs immediately when she came home from that first Tuesday evening session absolutely glowing, talking nonstop about this incredible instructor who had somehow recognized her untapped artistic potential within 2 hours of meeting her. Vincent has this amazing ability to see what people are truly capable of, she gushed, pulling out her phone to show me photos of other students' work. He says I have natural talent that just needs proper guidance and intensive development. Within a week, she was spending entire weekends at the Arts Center, disappearing Saturday morning and returning Sunday night with paint-stained clothes and stories about breakthrough creative sessions that somehow always involved just her and Vincent working late into the evening while other students had gone home. I noticed she started checking her phone constantly during our conversations, smiling at messages she wouldn't share, and suddenly everything I suggested, movies we used to enjoy, restaurants we talked about trying, weekend trips to the coast, was dismissed as conventional or creatively stifling. She began quoting Vincent's philosophies about breaking free from domestic constraints and finding your authentic artistic voice through total immersion in the creative process. Vincent says most people never reach their potential because they're too comfortable with mediocrity, she told me one evening while scrolling through art-related Instagram posts instead of watching the show we'd started together. He thinks I could actually make a living as an artist if I commit fully to developing my technique. I watched her transform from the easygoing woman I'd fallen for into someone obsessed with artistic validation and increasingly dismissive of our shared life. She stopped asking about my work projects, barely listened when I talked about the logo design I'd been struggling with for weeks, and rolled her eyes whenever I mentioned practical concerns like our lease renewal or planning for her sister's wedding next spring. "You're so focused on mundane details," she'd say with this new condescending tone. Vincent says people who prioritize logistics over passion never achieve anything meaningful. The woman who used to laugh at my terrible puns and get excited about trying new restaurants now treated our conversations like interruptions from more important thoughts. She started staying out until midnight on weeknights, claiming she needed to process the day's creative insights with fellow students, though somehow these processing sessions only seemed to include her and Vincent. When I asked about meeting this transformative teacher who was consuming so much of her time and energy, she became defensive. "Vincent values artistic privacy," she explained. "He doesn't believe in mixing personal relationships with creative mentorship." The breaking point came on a Thursday evening when I arrived home from a particularly long day debugging client websites to find Rebecca sitting at our kitchen table with a serious expression and what looked like rehearsed talking points written on notebook paper. The apartment smelled like the expensive takeout she'd ordered, the kind we usually saved for special occasions, and she'd lit candles like this was some kind of romantic evening, which made what followed even more surreal. "Alex, we need to talk about my artistic development and our living situation," she announced, like she was delivering a prepared presentation to a client. "Vincent thinks I'm ready for intensive creative work, but I need proper studio space and complete freedom from domestic distractions." She gestured around our apartment as if it were some kind of creative prison instead of the home we'd carefully furnished together with trips to weekend estate sales and hours spent debating paint colors. Then came the kicker that left me speechless. She wanted me to find somewhere else to live temporarily so she could convert our entire apartment into a proper art studio. "It's not about you personally," she insisted when she saw my stunned expression, though everything about her tone suggested it absolutely was. "This is about my creative journey, my artistic awakening. Vincent says true artists have to choose between comfort and greatness, and I choose greatness." She had actually chosen Vincent, but I wasn't supposed to acknowledge that obvious fact. "I need space to explore my artistic identity without feeling guilty about neglecting domestic responsibilities," she continued, reading from her notes. "Vincent believes my work could be gallery quality within 6 months if I can dedicate myself completely." I sat there processing her words, realizing this woman had just asked me to move out of my own home so she could play house with her painting instructor under the guise of artistic development. 2 years of building a life together, and she was tossing it aside for someone who'd convinced her she was the next Georgia O'Keeffe after 6 weeks of Tuesday evening classes. I surprised Rebecca by agreeing to move out immediately, but I wasn't being the understanding boyfriend she expected. While she practically bounced with excitement about her upcoming creative transformation, I was already 3 steps ahead, making phone calls that would fundamentally change her artistic paradise. The first call was to our landlord, Mr. Patterson, a straightforward guy who'd always appreciated that I paid rent on time and never caused problems. "I need to remove my name from the lease," I told him, explaining that Rebecca wanted to convert the space for business purposes. He was surprisingly accommodating once I mentioned she'd be using it as an art studio and might have people coming and going at all hours. "She'll need to qualify for the full lease amount on her own income," he said matter-of-factly. "And there's a $500 lease modification fee." Rebecca's barista income barely covered her current $600 contribution, let alone the full $2,400, but that wasn't my problem anymore. My second call was to Portland General Electric, followed by the water company, internet provider, and gas company. Funny how quickly you can disconnect services when everything's in your name and you're the account holder. I scheduled everything to shut off the following week, giving Rebecca just enough time to contact them herself if she wanted to maintain utilities in her artistic sanctuary. While I made these strategic arrangements, Rebecca spent the weekend planning her studio layout and texting constantly with Vincent about optimal creative environments and the importance of natural light for oil painting. She was so focused on her artistic vision that she didn't ask any practical questions about lease transfers or utility responsibilities. The actual packing process was eye-opening in ways I hadn't expected. Going through our shared belongings, I realized how much of our life together had been my investment. The nice couch we'd bought for the living room, my credit card, the kitchen table where Rebecca had just delivered her artistic ultimatum, I'd refinanced it through my furniture store account. The bedroom set, the decent television, the coffee maker she used every morning, almost everything substantial belonged to me or had been purchased with my money. Rebecca noticed me loading my coffee maker into a box and looked genuinely confused. "Wait, you're taking that?" she asked. "I use that every morning." "Buy your own," I replied, continuing to pack my kitchen appliances. "I thought we could work out some kind of arrangement for shared items," she said, suddenly less confident about her artistic revolution. "You thought wrong." The moment that confirmed everything I suspected came when I moved our bedroom dresser to access the closet behind it. There, barely concealed, was Vincent's easel and a collection of expensive art supplies I'd never seen before. Professional-grade oil paints, brushes that probably cost more than Rebecca made in a week, canvases stretched and ready for artistic genius. Vincent had already been establishing his presence in our bedroom while I was at work, preparing for Rebecca's creative awakening in the most intimate space of our home. Rebecca caught me staring at the setup and had the grace to look embarrassed for about 2 seconds before shifting into defensive mode. "Vincent lent me some supplies so I could practice advanced techniques at home," she explained quickly. "He's just being supportive of my development." "How supportive?" I said, noting that one of his paint tubes was open and dried paint suggested it had been used recently. "Guess he's really invested in your artistic progress." She didn't respond to that, but the red flush creeping up her neck told me everything I needed to know. Vincent wasn't just her instructor, he was already making himself comfortable in our space, probably planning to move in the moment I moved out. By Sunday afternoon, I had loaded everything that mattered into my truck and a small U-Haul trailer. Rebecca stood in what was now her empty apartment, looking around at the bare walls and missing furniture with an expression that suggested reality was starting to penetrate her artistic bubble. "This feels so final," she said quietly, apparently realizing that my departure meant more than just gaining studio space. "You're the one who wanted this," I reminded her, handing over the spare key. "Enjoy your creative journey." I left a simple note on the kitchen counter with the address of a storage facility where I'd be keeping anything too large for my new place, along with my new contact information for any legitimate emergencies. "Good luck with Vincent," I wrote at the bottom, though I doubted either of them would need luck for what they had planned. For 5 glorious weeks, Rebecca lived in her artistic paradise, and I have to admit, watching it unfold from a distance was better entertainment than anything on Netflix. My new studio apartment across town was quiet, organized, and blissfully drama-free, while Rebecca's social media transformed into a non-stop celebration of her creative awakening. She posted photos of canvases propped against our old living room walls, paint-splattered drop cloths covering the hardwood floors we'd spent a weekend refinishing together, and artistic shots of Vincent's expensive brushes arranged just so in the morning light. Finally living my authentic life as an artist, she captioned one photo of herself in paint-covered overalls, looking pensively out the window with a palette in hand. The hashtags were endless. Hashtag artistic journey, hashtag authentic self, hashtag creative awakening, hashtag follow your passion, hashtag artist life. She started hosting what she called creative salons, basically painting parties where fellow students from Vincent's class would come over to drink wine and create collaborative artistic experiences, while Rebecca documented everything for social media. Vincent appeared in more and more photos, always positioned as the wise mentor guiding his devoted student, though his hand placement in several shots suggested mentoring wasn't his only interest. Working late on a breakthrough piece with my incredible instructor, she posted one evening, accompanied by a photo of 2 wine glasses and paint-covered hands that were clearly both hers and Vincent's. The comments from her friends were predictably supportive, living your best life, and so inspiring to see someone follow their dreams. I noticed her friend Jessica had become particularly vocal about Rebecca's transformation, sharing every post with comments about brave women who refuse to settle for conventional relationships, and the importance of supporting each other's artistic growth. I was apparently the conventional relationship Rebecca had refused to settle for, which was fine by me since I was discovering I didn't miss the drama nearly as much as I'd expected. The first crack in the artistic paradise appeared during a particularly severe Portland thunderstorm in mid-November. I was in my warm, well-lit apartment working on a logo design for a local brewery when my phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca's number, though the tone was different from her usual confident messaging. "Hey Alex, quick question. Do you remember what company handled our electricity? Having a small issue here." I waited several hours before responding, mainly because I was genuinely busy with paying work, but also because I wanted to see how small this issue really was. "Portland General Electric," I texted back. "Account numbers should be on old bills if you kept them." What I didn't mention was that the account had been closed for non-payment the previous week, exactly as I'd scheduled when I canceled the service. Turns out Rebecca had assumed the utilities would just continue automatically, never bothering to set up new accounts in her name or even understanding that someone actually had to pay those bills every month. The next morning brought a flurry of increasingly panicked messages as Rebecca realized her artistic sanctuary had become a cold, dark cave without electricity, heat, or hot water. "The power company says there's no active account for this address," she texted. "They want a $400 deposit plus connection fees because I don't have established credit with them. This is insane." I almost felt sorry for her until I remembered how she dismissed my concerns about practical matters as mundane details that were beneath her artistic focus. The social media posts took on a different tone as Rebecca tried to maintain her creative narrative while dealing with the reality of utility deposits, credit checks, and waiting lists for connection appointments. Sometimes the artistic journey includes unexpected challenges that test your commitment, she posted, along with a photo of candles providing the only light in her cold studio. True artists persevere through obstacles that would stop ordinary people. Vincent's presence in her posts became noticeably less frequent once the apartment lost its comfortable amenities. Funny how someone's commitment to artistic mentorship wavers when it means sitting in a freezing apartment with no electricity or hot showers. Rebecca's friend Jessica attempted to salvage the narrative by starting a social media campaign about my vindictive behavior, posting long rants about men who sabotage women's dreams, and calling me emotionally abusive for leaving an artist stranded without basic utilities. But the campaign backfired spectacularly when people started asking obvious questions. Why didn't Rebecca handle her own bills? Where was Vincent during this crisis? What kind of artistic mentor abandons his star student when things get difficult? The comments section became a battlefield between Jessica's feminist rhetoric and practical-minded people pointing out that adults are responsible for their own utility bills regardless of their artistic aspirations. Vincent's true colors emerged faster than watercolors bleeding in the rain once Rebecca's artistic paradise required actual financial commitment from him. I learned about his spectacular retreat through a combination of Rebecca's increasingly desperate social media posts and some strategic intelligence gathering from mutual acquaintances in Portland's surprisingly small art community. The first red flag should have been Vincent's sudden unavailability when Rebecca needed help navigating utility deposits and credit applications. This man who had been spending every evening at her apartment suddenly had family obligations and prior commitments that kept him away during her practical crisis. Rebecca tried to maintain the mentor narrative on social media, posting photos of her working alone by candlelight with captions about solitary artistic exploration and finding strength through independent creativity, but anyone paying attention could see she was scrambling. Then came the revelation that destroyed whatever artistic credibility Vincent had maintained. One of Rebecca's fellow students, a woman named Diana who'd been in the advanced class since the beginning, reached out to Rebecca with some uncomfortable information about their beloved instructor. Apparently Vincent had been directing students to purchase supplies exclusively from an expensive art store downtown, claiming these particular brands were essential for serious artistic development. What he hadn't disclosed was his financial arrangement with the store owner. Vincent received a 15% commission on everything his students purchased based on his recommendations. Those $200 brush sets and $150 paint collections he'd insisted were necessary for artistic growth? He was making money every time a student bought them. Rebecca had spent nearly $800 on supplies Vincent recommended, meaning he'd pocketed over $100 from her artistic journey before she'd even finished her first painting. Diana had discovered this when she'd gone to buy more canvas and overheard the store owner mentioning Vincent's monthly commission check. When Rebecca confronted Vincent about this arrangement during what would be their final late-night studio session, his response revealed exactly the kind of man he really was. "That's just business, Rebecca," he told her, according to the tearful account she later shared with Jessica, who naturally posted about it online despite Rebecca's request for privacy. "Artists need to understand the commercial side of creativity. I was teaching you about the real art world." But the conversation got much worse when Rebecca pressed him about their personal relationship and his commitment to her artistic development. That's when Vincent dropped the bombshell that shattered Rebecca's creative fantasy completely. He was married. Not separated, not in the process of divorce, not in an unhappy marriage he was planning to leave, married to a woman who had been questioning his increasingly frequent evening absences and was starting to demand answers. "My wife has been asking questions about my late nights at the studio," Vincent admitted, suddenly looking more like a scared middle-aged man than an inspiring artistic mentor. "She saw some of your Instagram posts where you tagged me, and now she's threatening to come to the art center to meet my devoted students herself." The artistic affair that Rebecca had believed was a profound creative and romantic connection was actually just a midlife crisis fling for a married man who sold overpriced art supplies on the side. Vincent made it clear that whatever they'd had was ending immediately. He couldn't risk his marriage or his teaching position for what he now described as a professional relationship that got a bit too personal. Rebecca's social media presence shifted dramatically after this conversation. Gone were the triumphant posts about artistic awakening and creative passion. Instead, her feed became filled with vague quotes about fake people and learning who you can really trust, mixed with defensive posts about the challenges of being a misunderstood creative in a commercial world. She started attacking the art supply store publicly, claiming they were exploiting artists with overpriced materials, which backfired when other customers defended the quality and service they'd received. Jessica tried to maintain the feminist narrative, posting lengthy rants about men who manipulate vulnerable women pursuing their dreams. But the support for Rebecca was dwindling as more details emerged about Vincent's wife and the commission arrangement. The art community gossip mill, which had initially been sympathetic to the promising student being mentored by an experienced instructor, turned decisively against Rebecca once word spread about her affair with a married teacher. Several students dropped out of Vincent's classes entirely, not wanting to be associated with the drama, and the Community Arts Center began quietly investigating whether Vincent's conduct violated their instructor guidelines. Rebecca found herself isolated from the artistic community she'd thought she was joining, with expensive supplies she couldn't return, half-finished paintings that now reminded her of the biggest mistake of her life, and utility bills she still couldn't afford to pay. The financial reality of Rebecca's artistic awakening hit like a freight train carrying overpriced art supplies and unpaid utility bills. From my comfortable distance, I watched her realize that passion projects don't pay rent and that Vincent's "follow your dreams" philosophy had some serious practical limitations she hadn't considered. Her part-time barista schedule, which had been perfectly adequate when I was covering most of our living expenses, suddenly became woefully insufficient when she needed to handle a $2,400 monthly rent payment plus the utility deposits and connection fees that were mounting daily. Rebecca started desperately applying for full-time positions, but her recent social media presence worked against her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Potential employers who Googled her name found months of posts about prioritizing art over conventional employment, rejecting domestic responsibilities, and dismissing practical concerns as beneath her creative calling. Who wants to hire someone who's publicly declared that regular work is creatively stifling and that true artists shouldn't have to worry about mundane details like paying bills on time? Her attempts to monetize her artistic journey proved equally disastrous. Rebecca launched an online shop featuring her paintings, pricing them based on the cost of Vincent's expensive supplies rather than any realistic market assessment. She was asking $400 for beginner-level oil paintings that had cost her $200 in materials to create, apparently believing that expensive brushes automatically translated to valuable artwork. The local art market, as I could have told her from my experience designing marketing materials for galleries, was completely saturated with amateur work from people who'd taken a few classes and thought they were ready to compete with established artists. Her paintings sat unsold while she grew increasingly desperate, eventually dropping prices to barely above her material costs, which meant she was essentially working for free while losing money on each piece. Meanwhile, our former landlord Mr. Patterson was losing patience with her inconsistent rent payments and creative excuses. When Rebecca tried to negotiate paying with artwork instead of money, suggesting that her paintings could serve as collateral for missed rent, he gave her a reality check that was probably long overdue. Ms. Chin, he told her during a conversation I heard about through his maintenance guy, who happened to be dating one of my coworkers, I own rental property, not an art gallery. I need actual money, not paintings of flowers that nobody wants to buy. The eviction process started after Rebecca missed her second consecutive rent payment, despite having blown through most of her savings on Vincent's recommended supplies before learning about his commission arrangement. She attempted to appeal to Mr. Patterson's sympathy, explaining about her artistic journey and the betrayal by her mentor, but landlords deal with sob stories every day and rarely find them more compelling than actual rent payments. Rebecca's parents, who I'd met several times during family dinners and holiday visits, provided the final blow to her artistic fantasy when she called them begging for financial assistance. Her father, a practical man who worked construction and had raised Rebecca to value honest work over grandiose dreams, was reportedly not sympathetic to her situation. "You made your choices, honey," he told her during a phone conversation that Jessica later described in another ill-advised social media post. "You had a good situation with a nice young man who treated you well, and you threw it away for some nonsense about being an artist. Now you need to face the consequences and figure out how to take care of yourself like an adult." Her mother was slightly more diplomatic but equally unwilling to enable Rebecca's poor decisions by bailing her out financially. They'd worked hard their entire lives and weren't about to subsidize their daughter's mid-20s crisis, especially when it involved breaking up someone else's marriage and abandoning practical responsibilities for artistic delusions. Desperate to avoid eviction, Rebecca began panic-selling furniture and belongings, only to discover that most of the valuable items in the apartment had actually belonged to me. The nice couch, the kitchen table, the decent television, the appliances that made daily life comfortable, almost everything worth selling had left with me when I moved out. She was left trying to sell her art supplies, but even those had little resale value since she'd opened and used most of Vincent's expensive recommendations. The specialty brushes and professional-grade paints that had seemed so essential for serious artistic development were now just expensive reminders of how thoroughly she'd been manipulated by a married man with a side hustle in art supply commissions. Rebecca's desperate scramble for survival became increasingly pathetic to watch, though I'll admit I followed the drama with the same fascination people reserve for reality TV shows about financial disasters. After losing the apartment, she moved in with Jessica temporarily, which seemed like the natural next step since Jessica had been her most vocal supporter throughout the artistic awakening disaster. What I didn't expect was how quickly that living arrangement would implode under the weight of Rebecca's continued poor decisions and Jessica's growing realization that supporting someone's dreams online was very different from financially supporting their actual life. Jessica's social media posts about the living situation started optimistically, with photos of the two friends having roommate wine nights and captions about women supporting women through difficult transitions. But within 2 weeks, the tone shifted noticeably as Rebecca failed to contribute to household expenses, leaving dirty art supplies in Jessica's kitchen sink, and continuing to blame everyone else for her situation instead of taking responsibility for her choices. Sometimes helping a friend means having difficult conversations about personal accountability, Jessica posted cryptically, though she deleted it within hours after Rebecca saw it, and they had what neighbors described as a screaming match that lasted until 2 a.m. The friendship deteriorated rapidly when Rebecca started treating Jessica's apartment like a free hotel while actively pursuing her next meal ticket through online dating apps. I learned about this development through mutual friends who'd noticed Rebecca's sudden appearance on every dating platform, specifically targeting men whose profiles mentioned homeownership, stable careers, or financial success. Her dating strategy was transparently mercenary. She'd swipe right exclusively on guys who looked financially comfortable, then steer conversations toward their living situations and career stability within the first few messages. Looking for someone mature who understands that relationships require mutual support, her dating profile read, which was code for seeking new financial provider after previous arrangement ended badly. Rebecca's recent public meltdown made potential partners understandably wary, especially since her social media history was easily discoverable and painted a clear picture of someone who'd abandoned a stable relationship for an affair with a married art teacher who'd been scamming his students. Modern dating apps make it remarkably easy to research potential matches, and Rebecca's artistic journey documentation worked against her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Meanwhile, Vincent had completely vanished from her life after his wife had apparently discovered the extent of his inappropriate relationship with students and threatened divorce proceedings. The Community Arts Center had quietly terminated his teaching contract after conducting their investigation, though they'd avoided public statements to minimize drama. Vincent's wife had also made her own Facebook post about home-wrecking art students who target married instructors, which didn't specifically name Rebecca but included enough details that anyone familiar with the situation could connect the dots. The post went semi-viral in Portland's art community, effectively blacklisting Rebecca from any legitimate artistic circles she might have hoped to join. Jessica eventually reached her breaking point when Rebecca brought a different man home 3 nights in a row, apparently auditioning potential financial supporters while contributing nothing to rent, utilities, or groceries. The final straw came when Rebecca criticized Jessica's cooking and suggested they order takeout instead, expecting Jessica to pay for it since she was temporarily between income sources. "I can't do this anymore," Jessica told her during a conversation that several neighbors overheard through thin apartment walls. "You're bringing random men around, you're not contributing anything financially, and you're still acting like the world owes you something. This isn't what friendship looks like." Rebecca's response was predictably self-centered, accusing Jessica of being unsupportive during her time of crisis and failing to understand the complexities of her situation. But Jessica had apparently been reading the comments on her own social media posts and realized that most people thought she was enabling Rebecca's poor choices rather than helping her grow as a person. The living arrangement ended with Rebecca packing her remaining belongings and moving into a cramped studio apartment in one of Portland's less desirable neighborhoods, where she could afford the $800 monthly rent by working double shifts at 2 different coffee shops. The artistic studio that had seemed so important just months earlier was replaced by a space barely large enough for a bed and a microwave, where she now spent her free time applying for additional part-time work instead of creating gallery-worthy masterpieces. Her social media presence became sporadic and defensive, with occasional posts about building character through adversity and learning who your real friends are, but the triumphant artistic narrative had been completely abandoned in favor of survival mode. While Rebecca was learning to appreciate the artistic value of ramen noodles and studio apartments with thin walls, I was discovering that sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is having someone show their true colors before you make a permanent mistake. My new life had evolved in ways I never expected when I'd packed my truck that Sunday afternoon months earlier. The freelance graphic design business I'd started almost accidentally while working from my studio apartment had grown beyond anything I'd imagined possible. It began with a simple logo project for the brewery where I'd been grabbing lunch regularly. The owner mentioned needing design work. I offered to help at a reasonable rate, and word spread through Portland's small business community faster than gossip at an art center. Within 3 months, I had more freelance work than I could handle alongside my regular job, specializing in branding for small businesses that valued authenticity over flashy marketing. My clients appreciated someone who listened to their actual needs instead of trying to sell them expensive solutions they didn't require, and my prices were fair because I wasn't supporting someone else's designer handbag addiction. The financial freedom was remarkable. Every dollar I earned was mine to save, invest, or spend on things that actually mattered to me. I joined a hiking group that met every Saturday morning, something I'd always wanted to do but couldn't when weekends were consumed by Rebecca's social obligations and expensive restaurant visits. The physical challenge of climbing mountains around Portland helped me process emotions better than any amount of relationship analysis ever could. There's something clarifying about focusing on your breathing and footing while navigating a difficult trail. It puts relationship drama into perspective and reminds you that most problems are smaller than they seem when you're caught up in them. I started rock climbing at an indoor gym, initially just for cross-training but quickly becoming obsessed with the mental aspects of route planning and problem-solving. The climbing community was refreshingly direct and practical. People supported each other's goals without drama or hidden agendas, and success was measured by actual achievement rather than social media validation. Through the hiking group, I met Sarah, an environmental scientist who worked for the state analyzing water quality data. She was intelligent, funny, and had this refreshing way of discussing her work with genuine passion instead of treating it as something to endure until finding a better option. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours on a trail overlooking the Columbia River Gorge, covering everything from sustainable development to our favorite coffee roasting techniques, and I realized I hadn't had a conversation that substantial in years. Sarah paid for her own hiking gear, contributed equally to group dinners, and never once suggested that I should handle logistics while she focused on more creative pursuits. When we started dating seriously, she insisted on splitting restaurant bills and refused my offers to pay for things she could afford herself. "I like being financially independent," she told me after I tried to pick up the check for our 4th dinner together. "It keeps relationships honest when both people contribute equally." The contrast with Rebecca couldn't have been more stark. Sarah appreciated my planning and attention to detail instead of finding it suffocating, getting genuinely excited when I researched trail conditions for our weekend hikes or found new restaurants that matched our shared dietary preferences. She understood that thoughtfulness required effort and reciprocated with her own planning and consideration for my interests and schedule. Rebecca never contacted me directly, not even during her worst financial crisis, which confirmed everything I'd suspected about our relationship. If she truly loved me as a person rather than as a financial resource, she would have reached out when Vincent revealed his true nature, apologized for her mistakes, and asked if we could work things out. Her silence told me that I'd been correct in my assessment. I was never her boyfriend so much as her support system, easily replaceable once she thought she'd found a better option. Through mutual friends and Rebecca's continued social media presence, I learned that she eventually found some stability working as an assistant manager at an art supply store downtown. The irony wasn't lost on me that she'd ended up selling the same overpriced materials that Vincent had used to scam his students, though apparently she'd learned enough about profit margins and commission structures to be good at the job. I genuinely hoped she'd learned something from the experience and would make better choices in future relationships, both personal and professional. Looking back, I realized that Rebecca's artistic awakening had been the best thing that could have happened to our relationship, because it revealed fundamental incompatibilities that would have caused much bigger problems later. Better to learn someone's true priorities before marriage and children made separation complicated and expensive. I was grateful for the experience because it taught me to recognize when someone views you as a means to an end rather than a partner worth building something with, and I was now confident about setting boundaries with people who confused support with exploitation.